My name is Elizabeth Nolt, and I am going to be presenting part of Chapter 5 on equality of educational opportunity, and the part I will be discussing is students with disabilities. Students with disabilities is about education and is important for all children, but even more so for children with disabilities whose social and economic opportunities may be limited. And this is one of my first articles that I found by Aaron and Laprost. Before I begin, I would like to give you some of the definitions, and I'd also like to tell you why I am doing this chapter. The reason why I chose student with disabilities is because I have a little brother who, at a very young age, got diagnosed with dyslexia, and some of his teachers decided that he was being lazy instead of it just really wasn't his fault. He did not understand how to read. So a student with a disability is one who's required special needs to be successful in life. When talking about the inclusion classroom, this is where students with disabilities who receive some or all of their instruction in the general education setting as appropriate to meet students' academic and social needs. And this came from my second article by McCroy and McHatton. The last definition I'd like to give you is the response to intervention. And this is your RTI groups. And most of you that already have a teaching profession know about RTI teachers. These teachers help pull out students who need help or are having trouble with their academics. And the definition for that is it's a school-wide initiative with special education as an explicit part of the framework spanning both general and special education in collaboration with families as a mechanism for improving students' outcomes through assessment, progress monitoring, prevention, and intervention, and is in line with the expectations of No Child Left Behind and the Individual Disability Education Act. Now, in the book by Spring, it said that by the 1960s, the civil rights movement helped students with disabilities. And this movement was so everyone could participate fully and equally within the school system, which I agree with. I think that all of our students should be able to participate socially with all of our students. And the most common learning disability is just a learning disability, and this is the most common one among special education students today. Since the 19th century, many students with special needs have been neglected, and when I was reading the book, it said that these students got put in mental institutions so that people didn't have to put up with them, which is sad. The first political movement was in the 1950s and was called PARC. This was the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children. And this organization was one of the many that helped children with disabilities. Many of these organizations wanted to get rid of the laws that kept children with disabilities from participating in education. Now to our Public Law 94/142. This law was the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and this law made sure that all students had an equal opportunity to learn. And then in 1990, this law's name was changed to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And the students under this law got to participate and attend public school openly. Now we get to the NCES list of disabilities. And to find all the definitions for those, you can look in your book on page 117 and 118, and it will define each one of these more openly. The first one is autism. We have deaf and blindness, developmentally delayed, emotional disturbance, your hearing impaired, your mental retardation, your multiple disabilities, your orthopedic impairment, specific learning disabilities. We have our speech and our language impaired. We have traumatic brain injuries, and we have our visual impairments. And when it's talking about visual impairments, it's not talking about people who just wear glasses. It's talking about people who have a really hard time seeing even with glasses, or their eyes are not particularly in the same place that they should be in. When talking about students with disabilities, talking about their IEPs comes up. When Congress was first starting to come about with this, the problem they had was the government, the federal government, was gaining an increased control over the local school systems. And their way to resolve this issue was to create an individualized education plan, or your IEPs. And this document is written for each individual student. And this cut down on the amount of control the federal government had on the school systems. Under that same law, 94/142, it requires that an IEP is written for each student. This agreement gives the parents the ability to negotiate what types of help or education their child receives. An IEP has 5 different components, and they are as follows. The first one is, each IEP must have a statement of the present levels of educational performance of the child. The second one is that a statement of annual goals, including short-time goals and instructional objectives, must be included. The third one is a statement of specific educational services to be provided to such child and to the extent in which child will be able to participate in the regular education classroom. Fourth, the projected date for initiation and anticipated duration of the services. This means, for example, when will the student start, and is there any hope that the student will graduate from the program? Number 5 is having the appropriate objective criteria and evaluation procedures and schedules for determining, on at least an annual basis, whether instructional objectives are being achieved. What this means is that the student needs to, every year, have a new IEP set up, where the parents and the teachers agree on what are the needs of the child this year. Have they grown in their goals, or do they need to stick with the same goals? Inclusion. Inclusion came about in 1975 when the Education for All Handicapped Children Act called for all students to participate in the same classrooms. Full inclusion is believed to improve the amount of education and social development of children with disabilities. And then in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, gave full federal support with children with disabilities. And then in 1997, there was an amendment to this law, which was to emphasize the importance of inclusion children in the regular classroom. The name was also changed to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But then it was changed again on December the 9th, 2003 to No Child Left Behind. And this made students with disabilities take state testing. But it could be a different form of the test. For example, these students more than likely get read to, they get a longer test period time, they get manipulatives, and their choices are shorter or easier to read. The reason for this was if students with disabilities were held accountable, then the teachers would expect more from them. This act also has resulted in greater numbers of students with disabilities receiving most of their education from a general education classroom. And that quote also came from McCrae and McHatton. So in conclusion, the student education system has given children with disabilities a much greater access to public education and promote greater inclusion of these students alongside their non-disabled peers. And that also came from one of my articles on Aaron and LaProst. And thank you again, and I hope you did learn something new about children with disabilities.